Welcome back. It's good to have you back. Remember last week we finished with the idea of a duck-billed platypus being a conundrum for evolutionists. It was quite a beast, isn't it? Imagine getting an animal like this: a duck, a bill like a duck, a beaver-like tail, a hair like a bear, webbed feet like an otter, claws like a reptile, lays eggs like a turtle, feeds its young on milk like a mammal, makes electrical impulses, has spurs like a rooster, and poison like a snake. Where do you put it in the evolutionary chain? What did it evolve from? This gentleman says that feature reptiles, bats, and mammals. We know, I believe, every time an evolutionist looks at a platypus, I think that God smiles because he made it just for them. I like that. The questions that remain unanswered by evolution, and this is what we need to go back to time after time after time. Much of the evolutionary arguments we listen to or see on YouTube and other parts of the internet, on the television by popular people like David and Brian Cox and people like that, they all bypass this question of the beginning. Mr. Cox actually tells you a couple of times he knows what happened in the beginning, but when you listen to him carefully for the rest of the program, it obviously turns out he doesn't know. And all his physics mates, the guys who are still hardline physicists, would be there to back that up. They don't know. One gentleman, just after a Brian Cox film a couple of years ago now, it was followed about 6 weeks later by about 10 different astrophysicists and physicists talking about the origins of things. And at the end of the film, one gentleman said, he says, I doubt if we'll know anything about the origin of the universe for the next generation. As a matter of fact, he says, it's unlikely to understand anything about the origin of the universe for the next 2 generations. And that was just 6 weeks after Mr. Brian Cox said, we know how it all happened. And he's very, very confident in letting us know. And he's produced some good films in order to prove that which he knows. But in actual fact, it's all speculation. So, one of the main questions, what was there to cause the Big Bang, matter or intelligence, okay? Is it more likely that things just happen by chance, or is there an intellect behind everything that we see around us? How can you get life from no life, biogenesis or creation? Did it just happen by chance, or actually was somebody intelligent creating everything? Let me just throw something simple in before we move on from these questions, okay? Look around you, wherever you are at the moment. You might be in your living room, you might be in a bedroom, you might be in a classroom, you could be at your university or whatever, okay? Here's a challenge. Look around you and pick out one thing that you know happened by total accident with no intelligence behind it, okay? In front of you, I'm assuming, is a computer. You're looking at a computer screen. Ask yourself a question. Did it just happen, or did intelligence create it, make it? Quite often you'll have if you're by your computer desk, you'll have a little desk lamp. Look carefully at that desk lamp. Did it happen by accident, or was there some intelligence behind it? Now, I'm not asking you to name the intelligence. I'm not asking you to name the kind of factory that produced whatever you're looking at. I'm not asking you how many people were involved in the production of what you're looking at. I'm just asking you the basic question. Does it make sense to you to look at that object and say, that obviously happened by chance, with no intellect behind it at all? If you're like me and you're looking at your computer screen, you're looking at your computer, usually at the one side or around it, you'll have a printer. Look carefully at the printer. Did it just happen by chance? Was it an explosion in a plastics factory, in an ink factory? Or did somebody make it? Look at the curtains on the front of your windows. Was it an accident, or did somebody make them? Look at the door in the room you're in. Did somebody make it to fit that shape, that hole in the wall? Or did it just happen by accident, an explosion in a wood factory? Look at the lighting system. Look at the cupboards. Look at whatever you want in that room that you're living in right now, and you tell me if you have found, and you can send me an email. Let me know if you find one thing that's around you that somebody didn't make. It happened by accident. Okay? No intelligence involved. Alright? I'm wearing socks. Somebody made them. I'm wearing a shirt. Somebody made it. I'm wearing trousers. Somebody made it. I'm wearing glasses. Somebody made them. I'm wearing, well, we could go on, but we won't, okay? But this is, everything around us screams out intelligence, not an explosion in some factory somewhere producing whatever you are looking at. And yet, you are far more complex than your table lamp, even your brain. The best computer you have in front of you at the moment is absolutely nothing compared with your brain. Okay, it can do some things mathematically quicker than you can do. It can do repetitive things mathematically quicker than you. And they're getting better all the time with AI. But the reality is, no matter how good they are getting nowhere near the human brain and the complexity of the human brain and the simplicity of the human brain and the size of the human brain or body. It's just amazing what we are. And yet, people say, look at all this evidence and say, it just happened by chance, an explosion somewhere. I don't think so. And I don't think any evolutionist can actually come up with the answer for that. How can you get so many different animals? For example, a Great Dane, a pug. Creation, variation within a species, or evolution. Things just happened to mutate by accident over time. The questions that remain unanswered by evolution: where do you get the long time periods from? That just doesn't fit anywhere. The physical stuff that they're digging up in archaeology, it means human artifacts, as in cities, as in coins, as in demonstrable things that humans produced, are less than 10,000 years old. They're I don't know of any artifacts genuinely that can be pushed back further than that without pure speculation. As a matter of fact, they thought that the Chinese were really odd because they didn't have flint spear ends or flint axes or stuff like that we have. And they couldn't find any really old stuff. And then they realized, obviously, they made them out of bamboo. So while the similar ages were developing, while the similar human beings were doing similar kind of jobs, in our Western culture, we were using axe heads and flint and stuff like that to make axe heads. The Chinese didn't need to. Bamboo is a absolutely wonderful material, complex material, and they made their stuff out of that. But bamboo eventually rots, and so the reason why they couldn't find these old artifacts was it obviously had rotted out of situation. And same with recently somebody said, what about clubs? You don't find any real clubs lying around. Well, if clubs were made for wood, you wouldn't, would you? Because they'll be falling apart over time. But the evolutionists' main argument for the long time, the need for the evolutionist long time period, is to try and fit in the time for change, okay? And to give it the fancy name, uniformitarianism. Things can, given the speed of things now, we can look back in time and see how old they were when they started off. We mentioned that earlier on with stuff like stalagmites and the fossil record, and we demonstrated that's just not true. Coal and stuff like that, just not true. You don't need a huge amount of time. Usually what you need is pressure. Heat and pressure are the things that usually change materials quite quickly. Okay. And popular about 1947, a gentleman came along and he talked about catastrophes. things changing, sudden changes by catastrophes happening, whether it's an earthquake or whether it was lava pouring out of one place, changing an impact. Worlds in Collision was a popular book at the time. So this actually stood out against the idea of the long time phrases. And when the book first came out, he was laughed at. He was, it didn't fit the evidence as far as evolution was concerned. And yet many now are coming around to more concept of a catastrophe as opposed to the long time scales. So in evolutionary circles, this has become a little bit more popular. He's got his name back, if you will. But we Christians, we talk in terms of creation. We talk by God building time into the system that we see. And that can explain so many things. We dealt with that in one of the classes we had earlier, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So is the theory of evolution good science? We're not really dealing with science. It's outside of science remit. We're dealing with the concept of philosophy, the question of origins, where life began, where the world began, is not to be dealt with by science because it's outside of science's remit. And therefore you're in terms of philosophy, in the terms of belief, you're in the terms of faith. Now the question is it good, reasonable faith, or is it based upon a fantasy? In fact, evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. Many scientists have accepted it, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit in with it, according to Mr. Lipscomb, Professor of Physics at the University of Manchester. And that's a reality, okay? We don't want to look at what we don't want to see. We don't want to look in certain areas if it's going to challenge us because we'd rather not know. Many biology students are people who go on to be doctors. When they first go to university, they're told that evolution is a fact, and they'll get round to explaining it someday, but they never do. They never get round to explaining it because they didn't want to know. And yet at the same time, they'll make dedicated efforts to disabuse you of any idea of a God, of an intelligent being behind the universe, because that doesn't fit with their philosophy. And so they will spend vast amount of time, effort and money to change your idea and those type of things, okay? So basically, a lot of people accept evolution because that's what they've been told. They accept evolution because that's what they see on TV. There's many thousands or millions of pounds been spent every year to try and help people to continue with the concept of evolution. Matter of fact, Star Trek does a good job. That's what that's based upon. And start looking for the alien life. They don't realize that when we Christians talk about a creator, when we talk about God, we're talking about an alien. In real terms, God isn't of this world. God is outside of this world. God's the one they're looking for, but they're just looking in the wrong place, okay? So we were first. Jesus was an alien who stepped into humanity. Not an alien as you see on Star Trek, but certainly an alien as in different from this world, not of this world. So we've been way ahead of Star Trek many years ago with a far more reasonable understanding of who that alien being can be, because he's described himself. So is the theory of evolution good science? We're not dealing with science, but with philosophy. This teacher, this caricature you see here, today's lesson, evolution and man's descent from the apes. And the teacher says, evolution is a fact, regardless of whether or not the evidence supports it. Okay, facts do not speak for themselves. Facts that we look at are interpreted. They're read in the light of what we believe. Creative thought in science is just as real in science as it is in the arts. It is the motor of changing opinion. And that's, as I said before, practically every 10 years some new newspaper headline says the theory will have to be rewritten. Unfortunately, it never is. We still trot out the same old. The same old arguments have been running around in circles for years are still seen as in the popular opinion, kept alive by popular opinion in order to basically fool the masses at the end of the day. Science is a quintessentially human activity. It's not mechanized, it's not robot-like accumulation of objective information, leading by laws of logic to inescapable interpretation. If a human, one person said when you program a computer, garbage in, garbage out. If you are of a mind to promote something, you'll do your best to put your information forward that only holds up your view. I've tried to be a little bit more balanced. Some people might argue against that, and trying to show you that there's a bigger picture out there. Creationists often appeal to facts of science to support a view, and this is rational. And evolutionists often appeal to philosophical assumptions from outside science to support their view. While creationists are often criticised for starting with a bias, evolutionists also start with a bias, as many of them will freely admit. It's not a matter of whether one is biased or not. It's really a question of which bias is the best bias with which to be biased. Okay? We make assumptions, whether you're an evolutionist or whether you're a creationist. We all make assumptions, but we weren't there. We've got to look at the facts and then we try and interpret the facts. And what is the most reasonable interpretation? For me, when I moved from being an evolutionist into being a creationist, I couldn't get around the concept of matter turning into life, life coming from non-life. And the more I read about some of the great scientists in time past who kept stating that fact, that life only comes from life, then I was stuck with the idea. I couldn't get around the idea that you can't get blood out of a stone. You can leave a stone lying around for 10 million years and you'll still not get it turning into a living object. And I'm using the term stone. I know some people may complain about that. They'll say, well, we're talking about chemicals. We're talking about chemicals. Well, an individual chemical is no different from an inanimate matter. It's still in the same ballpark. And you need so much complexity in your chemicals before you can ever get anywhere near life. So it's exactly the same argument. It's just if you want to argue about that, you're just splitting hairs, because it's exactly the same. No life will produce nothing. You need life to produce life, and that's seen all around us. Look at a cow; it'll have a cow before it, unless it's Dolly. But even Dolly, the sheep, is produced using the DNA and RNA from a living creature. They didn't produce Dolly for nothing. It's just everything that we have in the science field says exactly the same thing. The debate between creation and evolution is primarily a dispute between two worldviews with mutually incompatible underlying assumptions. I've said it before. If you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, you don't believe life after death, then all you have is this world, this life, and there's nothing for you in the future. Some of the greatest atheists in times past have looked at death or approached death, and some have said they're frightened to death of what is out there, the unknown that is out there, because all they have is the ground under their feet to look forward to. Whereas a Christian looks forward to a concept of eternal life, walking from this life through a door into a new world, and with a whole new remit in front of them. Okay, we have hope. The atheist, at the end of the day, has no hope, and yet you listen to people all around you. Okay, when they talk about their mum, when they talk about their dad, when they're doing something special or something's happening in their lives, they say, I bet he's up there at the moment, he's looking down on us and he's laughing at what we're up to. Okay, that's not an evolutionist talking. It may be an evolutionist talking, but he's talking against his own evolution. He's talking against his own worldview. He wants to think, and he would like to think that there is more to this life, but he won't admit it, and that's his problem. We want there to be something more than this. And God says there is more than this, and at some point we'll come look at that. So the big question, what came first, matter or intelligence? Okay? Whatever you answer this automatically eliminates the other because you can't get something from nothing. As we saw in the little clip there. How did life come into existence? That's another good question. Evolution says chemicals gave rise to simple cell amoeba. The big problem, and the problem that even evolutionists on a good day will admit, there's no such thing as a simple cell. Even the simplest cell is a complex chemical factory which requires an intelligent designer. It's brilliantly made. It's brilliantly made, and it works absolutely magically until it gets a defect in it. Everybody knows you can't get blood out of a stone. You know, our heart is still a wonderful machine, a pump. You imagine all the different things that we've made pumps for in our last 100 years of scientific progress. You've got a water pump. You have a gas heating, the boiler pump, pumps the water in your boiler. How many of them last your lifetime? Your water pump in your car. You think of all the different pumps that we as human beings make. How many of them come anywhere near doing the kind of job that your heart does day in, day out? Absolutely phenomenal. And we look at that. If we pulled a pump off our car, a water pump off our car, and looked at it, and you said to somebody, "Hey, where did this come from?" And the guy say, "Oh, it just happened. You know, it was an explosion in a metals factory, and everything happened. Bump, it came down." You'd look at them as if they're stupid. Any simple pump that we make, even the simplest pump, is made by somebody. Sometimes a clever somebody, and sometimes a waste. I'm amazed at Dyson. You look at that Dyson Hoover at the moment, and that little motor they've got in there, running at 10,000 revs per minute, per second. That's amazing. That's about the closest we can come to is a human pump, a human heart. Nobody would say it Dyson. I mean, even that breaks down. Nobody's going to say that's going to outlast a human being. And yet the reality is it's very clever. But it didn't happen by chance. Dyson's got something like 500 engineers working flat out, coming up with new designs and improvements all the time. He's spending a fortune on making his Dyson. Not everybody complains perhaps about the cost of a Dyson, and it doesn't last forever because my daughter's got a Dyson at the moment and the battery's had it. And I had it about 4 or 5 years. It doesn't last forever. Your pump in your heart outlasts anything or most of the pumps that man can make at the moment. And we know that a human pump, a pump made by somebody, is made by somebody. And yet we look at the human heart, which is far more complex, and we say, "Oh, just happened. I just can't get my head around that now." Where did all of life's diversity come from? No matter how many different types of dog you breed, they're still in the canine family. You'll never see in nature a dog turn into an elephant or a cat, even in the past or present. Evolution said they just need time. Given enough time, we can make anything, or anything can happen. The majority of the geological timetables evolution lays out contradict one another. The date in the fossils, the date of the rocks is built on man-made chart and circular thinking. They say coal, diamonds, opals just need time. The reality is there's not time that produces these changes mostly, but pressure, heat and pressure. And we can reproduce many of these things in a laboratory today. Aren't we clever? Aren't we clever? Evolution says you just need time. Fossils are another example. Even the last 100 years, we have many examples of these things fossilized in a short period of time. It just doesn't work that way. They've changed the tree of how about evolution of man? They've changed the tree of man's evolution so often that many of the conflicting family trees are still to be found in biology and anthropology textbooks today. Every 6 months or so, someone digs up some bones or skull in the headline of many science journals, including Time magazine. It's usually evolutionary history will have to be rewritten. Okay, every 6 months or so. I was generous before. I used to say every 10 years. But if you look at papers, modern papers today, practically every 6 months there's some headline somewhere. And Time magazine's a cracker. Time magazine, time after time, will highlight some evolutionary story. And embodied in that quite often is this phrase: evolutionary history will have to be rewritten. Unfortunately, it seldom is. And the old discarded information is still served up in schools and classes as facts. What about morality? Man is distinguished from the beasts of the field by a sense of morality. That's a strong statement, okay? But man is capable, when properly educated, of distinguishing between right and wrong. In short, he possesses a conscience. Blind, irrational matter and force cannot have these characteristics. They cannot give rise to them, okay? There's no real reason for morality and evolution. Only a God who is himself good could have imparted this characteristic to his creation. Genesis 1, God says, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him, male and female. He created them. Now, we're not talking about physical image. We're talking about our personality. Man has a rational intelligence. He has the ability to reason, to invent, and communicate. Man has a will and a power to choose. He is a free moral agent. Man has emotions. He can experience joy, love, anger, hatred, and sorrow. Man has a conscience. He is able not only to distinguish right from wrong, but also have an inherent sense of guilt when he has done wrong, and a sense of approval when he has done right. There are no purposive principles whatsoever in nature, no gods, no designing forces that are rationally detectable in evolution and nature. Second, modern science directly implies there are no moral or ethical laws, no absolute guiding principles for human society. We live in a Western world, and in our Western world, because of our religious background, many of our ethics and our laws are built into our laws, come from the concept of being a God and that we're obeyed by God. In some other nations where that's not true, for example in China and some of these places, they have absolutely no moral issues dealing with their science. They can do stuff in genetics today that we can't touch because our laws won't let us touch. Now, that's not to say that in some laboratories there aren't some immoral people breaking ethical laws in order to gain an advancement over others, in order to make money or make their name. But in reality, they should be governed by our laws. Our laws are ethical laws, whereas in China they don't have those principles behind that. In some cases, in the laboratories especially, they're quite happy to break every ethical law alike. At the moment, there's one part of China, they've got huge camps. They're not really camps, they're really small cities. And inside those cities, because they don't like religion, because they're communists, they don't like religion, they have brought into those camps a lot of Islamists as well as Christians, but mainly the Islam religion. And these people haven't done anything wrong, apart from being born into Islamic faith. And they are taken into these cities, these societies, and they're having their brains changed, they're having their thinking changed to delete the Islamic thoughts out of their minds because they're being reprogrammed. Now, the Chinese would say, we're doing this to stop Islam growing and becoming a bigger problem in our country, as it is in certain areas. And so they're trying to educate them out of a situation for the future. But these people are taken off the street. not because they've broken a law and end up here and thinking Islamist, you're promoting bad things because of your Islamic faith. These are normal people who have not done anything wrong apart from belief in Islam, and they've been taken off the street and they're being reprogrammed. Now that couldn't happen over here because our ethical laws wouldn't allow us to brainwash them over here. We do try and help them not to use their Islamic a faith in order to undermine our Western culture, but we don't do this type of thing that the Chinese are prepared to do in order to get the same end product. So this gentleman continues, third, human beings are marvelously complex machines. The individual human becomes an ethical person by means of two primary mechanisms, hereditary and environmental influences. That is all there is. This gentleman is arguing about morality from the basis of who we know and our background, but he is dismissing actually that deep down a lot of our morality comes from the impact of our previous generations who did believe in God. Fourth, he says we must conclude that when we die, and that is the end of us. And there's basically what you have at the end of the day. There's the faith of an evolutionist. There is no such thing as life after death. You don't live on. This is it. You better make the best of it as is now because there's no future. So no hope. This other guy, he goes even overboard. He goes worse. Okay. Now, he is so much against the idea of religion that he's very strong and articulate in his statements. He says, I am arguing for a separation of state and church. I'm arguing for a separation of fantasy and reality as a necessary precondition for producing mentally healthy and responsible citizens. No nation in this day and age can afford mass insanity, not with the kind of weapons man is capable of producing. There are laws in most states, he says, which prevent the insane and the feeble-minded from having or raising children. And since no one but a moron or a lunatic can believe the Christian religion is the indisputable truth, one wonders why believers are excluded from such prudent legal restrictions. I question the right of the insane to perpetrate insanity, however numerous they may be. I'm for keeping religion out of schools. I'm for keeping religion out of churches and the homes. In fact, I'm for abolishing religion altogether. So there's a gentleman who's promoting evolution. So what about morality? In his book Ethics Without God, the atheist Guy Nielsen admitted that to ask is murder evil is to ask a self-answering question. How can you have good or evil? How can you have a moral stance? Because if you're just an animal, if you're just a product of chance, then where does the morality come in? You don't ask a dog, why did you steal those sausages? Well, you can ask if you want, but he will say they were there. Okay, I had the opportunity, so I did it. And often, sadly, many human beings behave like that as well. But in reality, most human beings accept some moral limits. If you're a gypsy, for example, a traveller, they have a simple moral code. I'm just generalising, so I apologise to any gypsy or travelling person who doesn't admit to this. Okay, but basically they've got an unwritten moral code that says if you're a gypsy, you don't steal from other gypsies. But that moral code also goes on to say everybody else is fair game. Okay, if they're not gypsies, if they're not travellers, it's fair to steal from them. Okay, so you have even in that society, in all societies, I would go as far as to say in all societies, there are moral references. Even in a society that decides that to eat a fellow human being is no problem. Cannibalism is good, and acceptable within that particular culture. They usually have a limitation. You eat your enemies. You don't eat your own people. Okay, so there's a moral, even in that situation, there's a moral code involved, and that's a distinction being made. Okay, most of us, even I would go as far as say every one of us, if we saw a little old lady being beaten up by a couple of big built teenagers, we would say that is wrong. Okay, that is just wrong. That should not happen. Somebody should do something about that. All right. Hitler, from an atheist perspective, following Nietzsche and some of these other individuals, he felt quite no problem at all in killing 6 million Jews. And he also, though it's not quite so obviously stated or often stated, he also felt that if you were disabled, you were also in the same situation, and many disabled people were sent off to the gas chambers. If you had any kind of defects at all, he wanted a master race. The sad thing about his own dreams or grandeur, if you like, is he couldn't have been part of it because his master race was blue-eyed, blonde, tall, people. He was short, dark hair with his little dark moustache. He wouldn't have fitted in his new master race, but he obviously overlooked that little bit of contradiction, if you will, in his moral behaviour. In communism, under communism, Stalin and his pals, Solzhenitsyn said that in the 70 years of communism, 69 million people died in the gulags, in the work camps. If you disagreed with the government, if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, you ended up in the gulags. There are even Christians. There are descriptions of having their nails torn out in order to say, deny God, and end up in these work camps. 69 million of his own people under communism died in these camps. The Chinese, with their communism, lots of people argue about morality. They say, you Christians, if it wasn't for God and Christianity, that's where all wars come from, and all nastiness comes from. Well, that's not true either, because I think if the figures are correct, under communism, under Chairman Mao, 35 million communists died under Chairman Mao. Okay? So you can't just blame Christianity for all the wars. And usually, when you look back through history, you find most wars are not really generated because of the religion itself. It's all about power. Some individual wanting power, and he uses religion as a cloak in order to achieve that. So the morality is just, you need to think about that. What basic moral standards are produced, if you will, by atheism? Relativism, okay? Most atheists would say, well, everything's relative. It doesn't really matter. For example, it suggests there are no universal objective criteria for determining morals and ethics. If you feel like it, do it. Is quite an acceptable thing with relativism. So this comes in. It was okay in that situation. We shouldn't worry about it in this other situation. Hedonism is a good atheist concept. If we're only going to live once, if we're only going to be here for the one time, surely we should eat, drink, and be merry. Really, it's a philosophy which argues about the aim of moral conduct is the attainment of greatest possible pleasure with the greatest possible avoidance of pain. You don't mind actually doing pain to other people. You just want to avoid pain yourself. Utilitarianism is the edifice that stands behind the foundation of hedonism. It suggests that good is that which ultimately gives the greatest amount of pleasure to the greatest number of people. Situationism teaches something is right because the individual determines it is right on a case-by-case basis. thus invalidating the concept of common moral law applied consistently. Determinism is the idea that man is not responsible for his actions. Okay, he made me do it. My parents made me do it. The society made me do it. I'm not responsible. It was their fault. And so people fail to take responsibility for their own actions. You've got two options. This is ultimately the two options. Either we believe in a creator, God created me, and if he knows, he sets rules for me to get the best out of this life, to be a responsible citizen in this life. Or if you're just an ape, if you just came from the trees, the jungle, or whatever, really, nobody can set the rules. What right have you to tell me what to do? As a matter of fact, under true evolutionary thought, you have no right to tell your children what to do, because as far as evolution is concerned, they're further down the evolutionary tree than you are. So therefore, they themselves should determine what you do, because they know best. They're more evolutionary developed. Charles Darwin said, with savages, the weak in body or mind are soon eliminated, and those who survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, do our utmost to check the processes of elimination. He said basically we shouldn't allow our civilization to deal with what really should happen in survival of the fittest. He said we build a silence for the imbecile, the maimed and sick. We institute poor laws, and our medical men exert their utmost skills to save the life of everyone to the very last moment. Why should you do that? If you're just an animal, if you're just a product of chance, why bother with all that? He says our laws in most states would prevent the insane and feeble-minded from having or raising children, since no one but a moron or a lunatic can believe the Christian religion is the indispensable truth. One wonders why believers excluded such prudent legal restrictions. I question the right of the insane to perpetrate insanity, however numerous they may be. I thought that'd be worth repeating because it's such a strong anti-religious stance. Religion's atheism, agnosticism, and humanism, and the New Age movement. These are all religions, okay? I know atheism claims to be scientific based, but it's not true, okay? The question of origins is outside of science remit. So atheism, anti-God, it's a faith, it's a belief. Agnosticism, the Latin word ignoramus is the same word as agnostic. Agnostic just means I don't know. And many people, that's become the religious attitude to life. I don't know if there is a God, and frankly, I don't care, often some would say. Humanism, there is no God. And many people, they were quite popular 100 odd years ago. They've kind of lost their edge because they implied that human beings, as they progressed, as they got to know better, they would actually become better people. And that just doesn't wash. It's not true. And the New Age movement is kind of trying to mix everything with everything else, and it ends up with nothing, basically. Governments. What would you claim as a good Christian country? Well, we've done all sorts of bad stuff over the years under the name of religion, but we've had some good. Germany, World War II, fascism, Hitler's Nazism. That's a good anti-God background. Dictatorship, the average dictator, communist dictator, they're not worried about the people. They're only worried about keeping in power. Corporations with no moral compass. We're living in an age now where the biggest corporations in the world pay the minimum amount of taxes. They don't care about other people. They're more interested in lining their own pockets. Absolutely tragic. So societies that are influenced by humanistic influence and psychology, erosion of a constitutional right to religious freedoms, that's the world in which we're living in today. And works of flesh are socially acceptable. Adultery, fornication, pornography, drunkenness, gambling, homosexuality, abortion, euthanasia, they're all up for grabs today. The only wrong is to say that such things are wrong. And that's where we'll stop for this week. I'll give you one more. Ecclesiastes says he has made everything beautiful in its time, also he has put eternity in our hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. There's a limit to what we can know. Okay, we'll start with this religious intuition next time. Have a good week. All the best. God bless.